He thought he had me cornered. Sitting across from me at the bank, my own son slid the papers forward with a cold smile, demanding I sign away everything. I had worked for my entire life. The air was heavy, my hands trembling, but my mind was sharper than ever. He didn't know that before walking in, I had already prepared my last defense, a desperate message scribbled on a hidden note.
Let me take you back to how it all started. 3 months earlier, I was living what I thought was a peaceful retirement in my modest home in Riverside, California. At 72, I had finally paid off my mortgage, saved a decent nest egg, and was enjoying the fruits of 40 years of hard work as a school librarian. My son Marcus, 38 years old, had always been challenging, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. The first red flag came when Marcus suddenly became overly attentive. After years of barely calling, he started visiting twice a week, bringing groceries, helping with yard work, and constantly asking about my finances. "Mom, you're getting older," he'd say with feigned concern. "Maybe it's time we discussed your future security." At first, I was touched by his apparent change of heart. How foolish I was. The visits escalated quickly. Marcus began bringing documents for me to sign, claiming they were for estate planning and tax purposes. He'd arrive with his girlfriend, Rebecca, who worked as a paralegal and would explain complex legal jargon in ways that made my head spin. "It's just to protect your assets, Mrs. Thompson," she'd assure me with a smile that never reached her eyes. Standard procedure for someone your age. But something didn't feel right. The documents seemed rushed, and Marcus would hover over me impatiently whenever I tried to read them thoroughly. When I asked to take them to my own lawyer, he'd become agitated. "Mom, you're overthinking this. Don't you trust your own son?" The guilt trips became his favorite weapon, and I began to question my own instincts. The breaking point came on a gray Tuesday morning in November. Marcus arrived unannounced, more aggressive than usual. "We need to go to First National Bank right now," he demanded. "There are some urgent papers that need to be signed today, or you'll face serious tax penalty." His urgency felt manufactured, but the fear in his voice seemed real, though I now realize it was fear of his plan falling apart, not concern for my well-being. As we drove to the bank, my anxiety reached a fever pitch. Something about this whole situation screamed danger, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. Marcus kept glancing at his phone, texting furiously while driving, and muttering things like, "It has to be today and she can't back out now." The pieces weren't fitting together, but I was about to walk into what I now know was a carefully orchestrated trap. The bank's marble floors echoed our footsteps as we entered. Marcus guided me to a private office where a stern-looking man in an expensive suit. "Mrs. Thompson," the man stood up. "I'm David Klein, the assistant manager. Your son has explained your situation, and we're here to help expedite this process." The room felt cold, sterile, and somehow threatening. I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the small piece of paper I had hastily written on during the car ride, my insurance policy, though I wasn't sure it would be enough. What happened next would change everything, revealing a web of deception that ran deeper than I could have imagined, and setting in motion events that would ultimately lead us all to a courtroom where the real truth would finally emerge. The papers Marcus placed before me weren't what he had described at all. As I squinted at the fine print, my heart sank. These weren't simple tax documents or estate planning papers. They were power of attorney forms, property transfer deed, and bank account authorization. Everything I owned was about to be signed over to my son with a few strokes of my pen. "Just sign here, Mom," Marcus said, pointing to multiple signature lines highlighted in yellow. His voice carried an edge I'd never heard before, a coldness that made my blood run cold. "The sooner we get this done, the sooner you can relax and not worry about all these financial burdens." But I wasn't worried about financial burdens. I was worried about my son trying to steal my life's work. David Klein, the assistant manager, sat across from us with the expression that's, "Mrs. Thompson, these documents will ensure your son can help manage your affairs more efficiently," he explained in a monotone voice. Many seniors find it's easier to have a trusted family member handle these responsibilities. The way he avoided eye contact and rushed through his explanation made me realize he was part of this scheme. I pretended to read the documents while my mind raced. How had my own son, the child I had raised, fed, and supported through college, become capable of such betrayal? The Marcus sitting beside me wasn't the boy who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on Amy, or the teenager who promised to always take care of me when I got old. This was a stranger wearing my son's face, and he was about to rob me blind. "I need a moment to think," I said, setting the pen down. Marcus's jaw tightened immediately. "Mom, there's nothing to think about. This is standard procedure. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." His impatience was showing, and I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. That's when I made my first move. Reaching into my purse as if looking for my glasses, I palmed the small note I had written during our car ride and placed it strategically next to the documents. The note was simple but desperate. "Help me. My son is trying to steal everything. I don't want to sin. Call police." Clean glanced at the papers again, and I held my breath, praying he would notice my plea for help. But he seemed focused only on getting my signature. Sliding the pen closer to my hand. "Mrs. Thompson, we do need to move forward today. The bank closes early on Tuesdays for system maintenance." Marcus leaned closer, his cologne overwhelming in the small office. "Mom, you're embarrassing me. Just sign the papers so we can go home." His tone had shifted from fake concern to barely concealed threat. For the first time in my life, I was actually afraid of my own child. But here's something you might not know about your own community, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments about which city you're from and whether you've noticed this too. Banks are required by federal law to watch for signs of elder abuse. The employees are trained to spot exactly what was happening to me, though not all of them choose to act on it. As I stalled for more time, pretending to struggle with the pen, I noticed Klein's demeanor beginning to change. He was reading my note, his eyes widening slightly. The room's atmosphere shifted imperceptibly, and I realized my desperate gambit might actually work. My note had been seen, but would it be acted upon? The next few minutes would determine whether I'd lose everything I'd worked for, or whether justice would finally prevail in this sterile bank office that had become a battleground for my entire future. What happened next was like watching a movie in slow motion. David Klein excused himself, claiming he needed to get additional forms from the main office. "Please wait here," he said, his voice noticeably different now, more official, more concerned. "I'll be right back with everything we need." Marcus seemed annoyed by the delay, checking his phone again and tapping his foot impatiently. "This is taking too long," Marcus muttered after Klein left. "Mom, when he comes back, just sign everything quickly. I have somewhere else I need to be." His mask was slipping further, revealing the calculating person underneath. I had raised this man, changed his diapers, stayed up nights when he was sick, worked double shifts to pay for his college, and this was how he repaid me. Within minutes, Klein returned, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a woman I didn't recognize, tall, professional, with kind but serious eyes. "Mrs. Thompson," Klein said, his tone completely changed. "This is Sarah Martinez, our senior branch manager. She needs to speak with you privately." Marcus immediately became defensive. "What's this about? We're in the middle of important business here. My mother doesn't need to speak to anyone else. I can handle her affairs." His voice rose slightly, and I could see panic creeping into his expression. Sarah Martinez said firmly, "I need to speak with your mother alone for a few minutes. It's standard protocol for transactions of this magnitude." Her voice brooked no argument, and she gestured toward another office.
"Mrs.
"Thompson, would you please come with me?" As I stood to follow her, Marcus grabbed my arm, not gently. "Mom, you don't need to go anywhere. Just finish signing the papers here." His grip was tight enough to leave marks, and for the first time, I saw who my son really was. This wasn't about helping me or protecting my interests. This was about greed, pure and simple. "Sir, please release your mother's arm," Martinez said sharply. "Mrs. Thompson, you're free to speak with whomever you choose." Her intervention gave me the courage I needed to pull away from Marcus and follow her to the other office. Once we were alone, Martinez closed the door and turned to me with genuine concern. "Mrs. Thompson, I found your note. Can you tell me what's really happening here?" The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. Someone had finally listened, finally seen through the charade. Through tears I hadn't realized I was shedding, I told her everything. The sudden visits, the pressure to sign documents, the threats disguised as concern, and my growing realization that my own son was trying to steal my life savings. Martinez listened without interruption, taking notes and nodding sympathetically. "Mrs. Thompson, what your son is attempting is called financial elder abuse, and it's a serious crime," she explained. "Those documents would have given him complete control over your assets, your property, and your bank accounts. You would have been left with nothing." Her words confirmed my worst fears, but also validated my instincts. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Martinez smiled reassuringly. "Now, we protect you and your asset. But I need to ask, are you prepared for what comes next? Because stopping this here is just the beginning. Your son isn't going to simply walk away from this plan." She was right, of course. Marcus had invested too much time and effort into this scheme to give up easily, and as we would soon discover, I wasn't his only target. The web of deception he had woven was far more extensive than either of us realized, involving other family members, forged documents, and a pattern of elder abuse that had been going on for months. The real battle was just beginning, and it would ultimately end where many family betrayals do in a courthouse, with a judge deciding who was telling the truth. When Martinez and I returned to the main office, Marcus was pacing like a caged animal. His carefully constructed facade had completely crumbled, revealing the desperate, angry man underneath. "What took so long?" he demanded. "Mom, we need to finish this now. I've got people waiting for me." "Mr. Thompson," Martinez said calmly, "I'm afraid we won't be processing these documents today. There are some concerns that need to be addressed." She positioned herself between Marcus and me, and I was grateful for her protection. Marcus's face turned red. "Concerns? What concern?" "I'm trying to help my elderly mother manage her finances. This is none of the bank's business." But his protests rang hollow now that the truth was out. "Actually, it is our business when we suspect financial elder abuse," Martinez replied evenly. "Mrs. Thompson has expressed that she doesn't wish to sign these documents, and she's entitled to that choice." Her professional demeanor never wavered, even as Marcus became increasingly agitated. "You don't understand," Marcus said, his voice rising. "My mother is getting She doesn't understand what's best for her anymore. These documents are for her protection." The gaslighting was breathtaking. He was trying to paint me as incompetent right in front of witnesses. "I understand perfectly well." I found my voice, stronger now with support beside me. "I understand that you've been lying to me for months. I understand that you are about to steal everything I own. And I understand that the son I raised would never do such a thing, which means I don't know who you are anymore." Marcus turned to me with a look I'll never forget. Pure rage mixed with disbelief that his plan had been discovered. "You ungrateful old woman," he snarled. "I've been trying to help you, and you're throwing it back in my face. You'll regret this." "Is that a threat, Mr. Thompson?" Martinez asked, her phone already in her hand. "Because threats against elderly family members constitute another form of abuse." Her readiness to document everything showed me this wasn't her first encounter with such situations. Marcus realized he had gone too far. No threat. I'm just frustrated." "Mom, please, let's just go home and talk about this rationally." But the rational time for discussion had passed long ago, probably around the time he first decided to steal from me. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "In fact, I don't want you in my house anymore. I don't want you calling me any. I need to figure out what other damage you might have done." The words were painful to speak, but necessary. Martinez had been quietly making calls during our conference. Now she hung up and turned to us both. "Mrs. Thompson, I've contacted Adult Protective Services and the police. They'll want to speak with you about this incident and any other concerning behavior you've experienced." Marcus went pale. "Police? This is insane. You're calling the police because a son is trying to help his mother?" This is a family matter. But his protests were becoming weaker, more desperate. Financial elder abuse is a crime, not a family matter, Martinez explained. When someone attempts to fraudulently obtain control over an elderly person's assets, that's theft, regardless of the family relation. Her words carried the weight of law, and Marcus finally seemed to understand the gravity of his situation. Detective James Rodriguez arrived within 20 minutes, along with a social worker from Adult Protective Services. As Marcus watched his scheme unravel, I felt a mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief that I had been saved from financial ruin, and heartbreak that my own child had been willing to destroy me for money. The investigation that followed would reveal the true extent of Marcus's betrayal and lead us to a courtroom showdown that would forever change our family and teach me lessons about trust, family, and standing up for yourself that I never expected to learn at my age. Detective Rodriguez was a patient man with kind eyes who reminded me of my late husband. He interviewed me for over an hour, documenting every detail of Marcus's behavior over the past months. What I thought were isolated incidents began forming a clear pattern of manipulation and financial abuse. Mrs. Thompson, Detective Rodriguez said as he reviewed his notes, "Has your son had access to any of your other accounts or personal documents?" The question sent a chill down my spine. In all the chaos, I hadn't considered what else Marcus might have done during his frequent visits to my home. That evening, accompanied by the social worker, Linda Chun, I went through my personal papers with growing horror. Important documents were missing, copies of my insurance policies, investment statement, even my social security card. Marcus had been systematically gathering information for months, preparing for this moment. But the worst discovery came when Linda helped me check my credit report. There were inquiries I hadn't authorized, accounts I hadn't opened, and worst of all, a second mortgage on my home that I knew nothing about. "Mrs. Thompson," Linda said gently, "it appears your son has been using your identity for some time. This goes far beyond what happened at the bank today." The next morning brought more devastating news. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, called to tell me she had seen Marcus at my house the previous evening, loading boxes into his car. When she asked him about it, he told her I was moving to a nursing home and he was helping me pack. The lies were becoming more elaborate and more dangerous. Detective Rodriguez obtained a search warrant for Marcus's apartment, where they found a treasure trove of evidence. In addition to my stolen documents, they discovered he had been running similar schemes on 2 other elderly clients from his job at an insurance company. My son wasn't just a family criminal. He was a professional predator targeting vulnerable seniors. The investigation revealed that Rebecca, his paralegal girlfriend, was his partner in the scheme. She had been providing legal expertise on how to structure the thefts to avoid immediate detection. They had planned to gradually drain my accounts, sell my house, and move the money offshore before I even realized what was happening. The good news, Detective Rodriguez told me during one of our meetings, is that we can recover most of your assets and reverse the fraudulent transaction. The bad news is that your son is facing multiple felony charges, and the case will likely go to trial. The prospect of testifying against my own child in court was terrifying. Despite everything he had done, Marcus was still the baby I had rocked to sleep, the little boy who had once promised to protect me when I got old. How had we gotten to this point? Linda Chun connected me with a support group for families affected by elder abuse. I discovered I wasn't alone. Financial abuse by adult children was disturbingly common. The shame I felt began to lift as I heard similar stories from other parents who had been betrayed by the children they had sacrificed everything to raise. One woman, Dorothy, had lost her home to a daughter who forged her signature on a reverse mortgage. Another man, Frank, had his entire pension stolen by a son who convinced him to invest in a fake business. The stories were heartbreaking, but also empowering. We were survivors, not victims. As the weeks passed, Marcus made several attempts to contact me, sometimes apologetic, sometimes threatening. He left voicemails claiming I had misunderstood his intentions, that he was only trying to help, that the police were making a bigger deal out of this than necessary. But I had learned to see through his manipulation tactics. The turning point came when Rebecca was arrested trying to cash a forged check in my name. Faced with her own criminal charges, she agreed to cooperate with prosecutors and testify against Marcus. The case against him was becoming airtight, but he still refused to accept a plea deal. His decision to fight the charges meant we were heading to trial, a public airing of our family's darkest moment. But I was ready. I had found my strength, my voice, and my determination to see justice done. The scared, confused woman who had walked into that bank months earlier was gone, replaced by someone who refused to be anyone's victim. The months leading up to the trial were both exhausting and empowering. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in elder abuse cases, prepared me thoroughly for what was to come. "Mrs. Thompson," she explained, "during one of our prep sessions, Marcus's defense attorney will try to portray you as confused, manipulated by the bank, or suffering from memory issues. We need to show the jury who you really are. A competent, intelligent woman who was systematically victimized by her own son." The media attention was overwhelming. Local news stations picked up the story, and suddenly my quiet neighborhood was filled with reporters wanting to interview the grandmother who fought back. I declined most interviews, but I did speak with one reporter who was writing a piece about the rise in financial elder abuse. "People need to know this can happen to anyone," I told her. "Education is our best defense." Marcus hired an expensive defense attorney, Craig Morrison, whose reputation for getting wealthy clients acquitted preceded him. I wondered how my son, who had claimed to be struggling financially, could afford such legal representation. The answer came when Detective Rodriguez informed me that Marcus had been using my stolen identity to obtain credit cards and loans. Even his legal defense was being funded with my money. The discovery phase revealed even more shocking details about Marcus's criminal enterprise. He had been planning this theft for over a year, researching elder law, studying bank procedures, and even taking courses on estate to better understand how to manipulate the system. This wasn't a desperate act by a troubled son. It was a calculated campaign by a professional criminal. My support system grew stronger during this period. Linda Chun checked on me weekly. The support group became my second family, and Detective Rodriguez kept me informed about every development case. Most surprisingly, several of my former library colleagues reached out when they saw the news coverage, offering emotional support and testimony about my mental competence if needed. The most painful part was going through old photos and memories while preparing for trial. I had to reconcile the loving son I remembered with the criminal he had become. When had he changed? Were there signs I had missed? Dr. Patricia Vance, a therapist who specialized in family trauma, helped me understand that predatory behavior often develops gradually, and that victims shouldn't blame themselves for not recognizing it sooner. Morrison's strategy became clear during depositions. He planned to argue that Marcus genuinely believed I was becoming incompetent, and that his actions were motivated by love, not greed. He would claim that my reaction at the bank was the result of confusion and fear, manipulated by overzealous bank employees who saw elder abuse where none existed. To counter this strategy, DA Walsh arranged for a comprehensive psychological evaluation. Dr. Michael Steinberg, a geriatric psychiatrist, conducted extensive testing and interviews. His conclusion was unambiguous. I was completely competent with no signs of dementia, confusion, or impaired judgment. His report would be crucial evidence. The weeks before the trial were filled with anxiety, but also determination. I had chosen to fight not just for myself, but for every elderly person who had been victimized by family members they trusted. The media coverage had generated dozens of calls to the DA's office from other potential victims, many involving Marcus's former insurance clients. One evening, as I sat in my living room preparing my testimony, I thought about the woman who had walked into that bank months earlier. She had been scared, confused, and almost willing to trust her son, despite her instincts. The woman preparing for trial was different, stronger, wiser, and absolutely determined to see justice done. The trial would be my chance to tell the truth, to expose Marcus's crime, and to show other elderly people that they don't have to be victims. It would also be my final confrontation with the son I had raised, loved, and ultimately lost to greed. The courthouse in downtown San Bernardino was imposing, with marble columns and an atmosphere of solemnity that made my knees weak as I walked through the metal detector. Jury selection had taken 2 days, and now we were finally ready for opening statement. As I sat in the witness gallery, I tried to avoid looking at Marcus, who sat at the defense table in an expensive suit I was sure I had unknowingly paid for. District Attorney Walsh's opening statement was clear and compelling. She outlined the evidence methodically: the forged document, the unauthorized credit inquiry, the fake second mortgage, and the attempted theft at the bank. "Ladies and gentlemen," she told the jury, "this case is about the ultimate betrayal, a son who decided his own mother was worth more to him as a victim than as a parent." Morrison's opening was exactly what we had expected. He painted Marcus as a loving son concerned about his aging mother's financial vulnerability. My client saw his mother making poor decisions, and he tried to step in to protect her. When she became frightened and confused at the bank, overzealous employees misinterpreted the situation as abuse. This is a family trying to navigate the difficult transition of aging, not a criminal conspiracy. The first week of testimony established the facts of the case. Bank employees testified about finding my note and witnessing Marcus's aggressive behavior. Detective Rodriguez presented the evidence found during the investigation, including the stolen documents and fraudulent accounts. The jury saw photos of the boxes Marcus had removed from my house, containing items he had no right to take. Sarah Martinez was a powerful witness. Her professional demeanor and clear recollection of events made it impossible for Morrison to shake her testimony. When he suggested she had misinterpreted a family discussion as elder abuse, she responded firmly, "Sir, I've been trained to recognize financial exploitation. What I witnessed was not a family discussion, it was coercion and attempted theft." Rebecca's testimony was devastating for Marcus's defense. Under immunity, she described in detail how they had planned to steal my assets, move the money offshore, and even researched which countries don't have extradition treaties with the United States. Her testimony revealed that Marcus had called me a stupid old woman who won't live much longer anyway, and had joked about spending my money on a luxury vacation while I lived in poverty. The most difficult moment came when Morrison cross-examined me. He was respectful, but persistent, trying to suggest I was confused about my son's intent. "Mrs. Thompson," he asked, "isn't it possible that your son was genuinely trying to help you, and you misunderstood his efforts due to anxiety about aging?" I had prepared for this question for months. Looking directly at the jury, I responded, "Mr. Morrison, I may be 72 years old, but I'm not confused about the difference between help and theft. When someone forges your signature, steals your identity, and tries to take your home, that's not help. That's a crime." The prosecution's case was strong, but I knew the defense would present their own narrative. Morrison called character witnesses who testified about Marcus's previous kindness and his apparent concern for my welfare. An insurance colleague described him as caring and professional. His ex-wife even testified that he had always spoken lovingly about me, but the prosecution had saved their strongest evidence for last. Dr. Steinberg's psychological evaluation proved my competence beyond doubt. The financial forensics expert showed the jury exactly how Marcus had planned to steal over $400,000 in assets. Most damaging of all, the prosecution played recorded jail calls where Marcus discussed his stupid mistake of getting caught and complained about the ungrateful old bat who had ruined his plan. As the trial progressed, I watched my son's confident demeanor crumble. He had expected to manipulate the system just as he had tried to manipulate me, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury could see through his lies just as I finally had. The closing arguments would determine everything. Would the jury see Marcus as a criminal who had betrayed his mother's trust, or as a misguided son whose good intentions had been misunderstood? After months of preparation, the moment of truth was finally at hand. D.A. Walsh's closing argument was passionate and precise. She reminded the jury of every piece of evidence, every forged document, every stolen dollar. Members of the jury, she concluded, the defendant didn't see his mother as a person deserving love and respect. He saw her as an asset to be liquidated. That's not love, that's predation. Morrison's closing focused on reasonable doubt and family complexity. He argued that Marcus's actions, while perhaps misguided, came from a place of genuine concern. "Yes, my client made mistakes," he admitted, "but criminal intent is different from family dysfunction. Don't destroy a son's life because a complicated family situation was mishandled. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, I could barely breathe. The foreman, a middle-aged man who reminded me of my late husband, stood solemnly. On the count of financial elder abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Marcus collapsed in his chair as the verdict was read. For a moment, I saw not the criminal who had tried to destroy me, but the little boy who used to run to me when he was scared. The tragedy wasn't just what he had tried to do to me, it was what he had done to himself. The sentencing hearing 3 weeks later brought no satisfaction, only sadness. Judge Patricia Hernandez sentenced Marcus to 5 years in prison, with restitution of all stolen funds plus damages. Mr. Thompson, she said, you violated the most sacred trust that exists, the trust between parent and child. Your actions have not only harmed your mother financially, but have destroyed your family forever. Marcus finally spoke, but his words were hollow apologies mixed with self-pity. I never meant for things to go this far, he said. I thought I was helping. Even then, he couldn't take full responsibility for his choices. The aftermath of the trial was both liberating and lonely. My assets were recovered, my credit was restored, and the fraudulent accounts were closed. Financially, I was made whole. Emotionally, the healing would take much longer. I decided to channel my experience into something positive. With Linda Chone's help, I began speaking at senior centers and community groups about financial elder abuse. My story resonated with audiences who saw themselves or their loved ones in my experience. The support group that had helped me through the trial became a permanent part of my life. We called ourselves the Silver Survivors, and we met monthly to share experiences and provide support to new members facing similar situations. Many of us had been betrayed by family members, but we found strength in each other. One of the most rewarding developments was the policy changes that resulted from my case. First, National Bank implemented new procedures for detecting elder abuse, and other financial institutions followed suit. The local Adult Protective Services Office received additional funding for elder abuse investigations, partly due to the publicity from my case. Marcus was released after serving 3 years of his sentence. He attempted to contact me once through a letter that Linda Chun reviewed first. In it, he claimed to have found religion in prison and wanted to apologize in person. I chose not to respond. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness, and some relationships can't be repaired. Instead, I focused on building new relationships and strengthening existing ones. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, became a close friend. My former library colleagues and I started a monthly book club. The Silver Survivors organized volunteer activities that gave us purpose and connection. The woman who had trembled in that bank office was gone, replaced by someone who refused to be anyone's victim. The experience had taught me that age doesn't make us vulnerable, isolation and silence do. By speaking out, fighting back, and refusing to be ashamed, I had not only saved myself but hopefully helped others avoid the same fate. 2 years after the trial, I was invited to speak at a national conference on elder abuse prevention. Standing at that podium, looking out at hundreds of social workers, law enforcement officers, and advocates, I realized how far I had traveled from that terrified woman in the bank. The most important thing I learned, I told the audience, is that predators count on our silence and shame. They count on us being too embarrassed to admit our own children might hurt us, too afraid to seem paranoid or ungrateful. But speaking up isn't betraying family, it's protecting ourselves and other potential victims. The statistics I learned during my advocacy work were staggering. Financial abuse affects 1 in 10 Americans over age 60, with family members being the perpetrators in over 60% of cases. The average victim loses $120,000, and many never recover financially or emotionally. These weren't just numbers. They represented real people whose lives had been shattered by betrayal. My work with the Silver Survivors had expanded beyond our local. We created a resource guide for elder abuse victims, developed a training program for bank employees, and lobbied for stronger laws protecting seniors from financial exploitation. The guide included warning signs I wished I had known: adult children who suddenly become overly interested in finances, pressure to sign documents quickly, isolation from friends and other family members, and unexplained changes in wills or bank accounts. One of our most important initiatives was partnering with local law enforcement to train officers on elder abuse recognition. Many crimes against seniors go unreported because victims are ashamed or afraid, and first responders often aren't trained to spot the signs. Detective Rodriguez, who had become a friend over the years, helped develop these training programs. The personal cost of my experience was still significant. The relationship with Marcus was irreparable. I had accepted that some betrayals can't be forgiven or forgotten, but I had also learned that family isn't just about blood relation. The silver survivors, my neighbors, my advocacy partners, these people had become my chosen family. My speaking engagements often included financial institutions, where I educated employees about recognizing elder abuse. Many banks had implemented the protocols that might have saved me, but vigilance was constant. Predators adapted their tactics, and protection efforts had to evolve too. One question I was often asked was whether I regretted fighting back instead of trying to handle things privately within the family. My answer was always the same: private family matters become public when crimes are committed. Marcus made the choice to break the law. Just made the choice not to be his victim. The ripple effects of standing up for myself extended far beyond my personal situation. 3 other victims of Marcus's schemes came forward after seeing the trial coverage, leading to additional charges and restitution. Several financial institutions changed their policies based on recommendations from our case. Most importantly, countless elderly people reached out to say my story had given them courage to report suspicious behavior by their own family members. Not everyone understood my choices. Some people thought I should have worked things out privately or shown mercy because Marcus was my son. But I had learned that enabling criminal behavior isn't love, it's complicity. By holding Marcus accountable, I had potentially saved his future victims and shown other predators that elderly people weren't the targets. The woman I had become was stronger, wiser, and more connected to her community than the isolated retiree I had been before this ordeal began. In trying to destroy me, Marcus had inadvertently given me a new purpose and a powerful voice. The irony wasn't lost on me. Today, 5 years after that terrifying day at the bank, I'm writing the final chapter of this story from my home office, the same room where Marcus had once stolen my personal documents, but now it's filled with advocacy materials, speaking notes, and thank you letters from people whose lives have been changed by sharing my experience. The Silver Survivors now has chapters in 12 and our resource materials have been translated into 6 languages. What started as a support group for a handful of elder abuse victims has become a national movement. We've helped pass legislation strengthening penalties for financial elder abuse in 8 states, and our training materials are used by law enforcement agencies across the country. My personal life has found a new rhythm and purpose. Mrs. Patterson and I travel together now, visiting national parks and taking the vacation I never thought I'd have the courage to enjoy alone. The book club with my former library colleagues has expanded into a thriving community group that organizes volunteer activity at local shelters and literacy programs. The most meaningful change has been my relationship with genuine family, not the family I was born with, but the family I chose. Linda Chun and I have become like sisters, supporting each other through life's challenges. Detective Rodriguez and his wife invite me to their family gathering, where I've become an honorary grandmother to their children. Sarah Martinez from the bank and I serve together on the board of a nonprofit that provides financial literacy education to seniors. I still receive occasional updates about Marcus through the legal system. He was released after 3 years, but violated his probation within 6 months by attempting to run another financial scam targeting elderly victims. He's now serving a longer sentence in a federal facility. The cycle of criminal behavior continues, but I've learned not to carry guilt for his choices. The most rewarding aspect of my advocacy work has been meeting other survivors who found the courage to speak up because of my story. Dorothy, whom I met in that first support group, successfully recovered her home and now runs elder abuse prevention workshops in her community. Frank, who lost his pension to his son, became a powerful advocate for stronger financial protection law. These relationships have shown me that healing comes not from forgetting trauma, but from transforming it into purpose. Speaking engagements have taken me across the country, and I'm constantly amazed by the diversity of people affected by elder abuse. It crosses all economic, racial, and social lines. I've spoken to wealthy retirees in gated communities and working-class seniors in small towns. The vulnerability is universal, but so is the strength that emerges when people decide to fight back. One of the most important lessons I share is about recognizing the warning signs early. Financial elder abuse rarely happens suddenly. It's usually a gradual process where boundaries are slowly eroded. Adult children start by asking to help with finance, then gradually assume more control until the elderly has no autonomy left. The key is maintaining your own financial awareness and never signing documents under pressure, no matter who is asking. I also emphasize the importance of building and maintaining social connection. Predators target isolated individuals who have few people looking out for them. Marcus's scheme might have succeeded if I hadn't maintained friendships with my library colleagues and relationships with neighbors like Mrs. Patterson. Community connections are our best protection against all forms of elder abuse. The legal changes that have resulted from cases like mine give me hope for future seniors. Banks now have better training and protocols for identifying financial abuse. Law enforcement agencies have specialized units for investigating crimes against the elderly. Adult Protective Services has more resources and authority to intervene quickly when abuse is suspected. But the most important change has been in public awareness. When I first experienced this abuse, I felt ashamed and isolated, believing I was the only person whose child would betray them this. Now, through media coverage and advocacy work, more people understand that elder abuse is common, that it's not the victim's fault, and that there are resources available to help. As I reflect on this journey from victim to advocate, I'm struck by how much my life has improved despite, or perhaps because of, the trauma I experienced. I'm more connected to my community, more aware of my own strength, and more purposeful in my daily activities than I was before Marcus's betrayal. The financial security I fought so hard to protect has allowed me to be generous with causes I care about. I've established a scholarship fund for social work students specializing in elder advocacy, donated to legal aid organizations that help abuse victims, and funded training programs for law enforcement officers. Most importantly, I've learned that age doesn't have to mean vulnerability if we remain engaged, informed, and connected. The stereotype of the helpless elderly person is not only harmful, it's inaccurate. We have experience, wisdom, and often significant resources that make us valuable community members, not just potential victims. To anyone reading this who recognizes themselves in my story, whether as a potential victim or someone already experiencing abuse, I want you to know that you're not alone and you're not powerless. There are people who will believe you, resources to help you, and legal protections available. Speaking up isn't betraying family, it's protecting yourself and potentially saving others from the same fate. And if you're from a community where elder abuse resources are limited, I encourage you to get involved in changing that. Contact your local representatives, volunteer with advocacy organizations, and share information with other seniors in your area. What city are you from? I'd love to hear in the comments about the elder abuse prevention resources in community and how we can work together to protect vulnerable seniors everywhere. The woman who walked into that bank 5 years ago was scared, confused, and almost ready to give up everything she had worked for. The woman writing this story today is strong, confident, and determined to ensure no other senior suffers in silence. That transformation didn't happen overnight, but it proves that it's never too late to reclaim your power and rebuild your life. My story began with betrayal, but it ends with hope, purpose, and the knowledge that sometimes our greatest challenges become our most meaningful contributions to the world. If my experience can prevent even one other family from going through this trauma, then every difficult moment of this journey has been worthwhile. The final lesson I want to leave you with is this: trust your instincts, maintain your independence, and never be afraid to ask for help when something doesn't. Your life, your assets, and your dignity are worth fighting for, no matter what anyone or even family might tell you otherwise. Remember, if you or someone you know is experiencing elder abuse, contact your local adult protective services or reach out to law enforcement. Help is available, hope is real, and you deserve to live your golden years with security and dignity. Thank you for listening to my story. Now go out and use your voice to protect yourself and others who might need an advocate. Together, we can create a world where aging means wisdom and respect, not vulnerability and exploitation.